Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The Rant. I'm Cory Morgan. This is my weekly therapeutic thing to get over the latest news. Good news, bad news, stupid news, whatever. I get it off my chest. I tell you what's been happening. I tell you what to think about it. You can tell me what you think. I used to be doing it live. One of the things I have to rant about is my rural internet coverage. I love living just on the edge of the city, but unfortunately, fiber optics and other such things aren't options for me out here, and the TELUS hub really sucks. So I'm going to record it and put it out. Can't get your live comments as they go, but as things improve, we'll get there. So I'll get on to a nice, simple story. This is the one that's been dominating the news all week. Nova Scotia, there seems to be the war is breaking out again, basically, between lobster fishermen and the local indigenous now lobster or fishers. Fair enough, every gender can fish. But it's getting really bad out there. Again, I mean, those guys were shooting at each other and chasing each other around in boats some years ago. This is what happens when you have race-based policy. Like, let's quit pissing around. When you have a policy for one race and not another race, there's going to be tensions. Always, and it's never going to stop. So that Marshall decision, bullshit. I mean, I can understand at least with some treaty decisions. So let's talk about that. There was a decision called the Marshall decision that said they had the right to sustenance and making a living type of lobster fishing. But it's led to and expanded into huge commercial operations that are decimating the local lobster stocks and are leading to, well, what's going to be a lot of unemployed lobster fishery people very soon. They're pulling out now, in the off-season, 50,000 pounds of lobster a day. This can't be sustained. And there's a reason that fisheries have seasons, because you can't pull them out while they're spawning, or you don't get new lobster down the road. But we've got a large number of people who are just living for the moment, make the money now while they can. And it's just going to decimate because they don't look beyond the end of their nose or beyond a few months. We're seeing the same problem with the sockeye run. Nobody likes to talk about it, but part of the problem on the west coast is some people are putting gill nets across that river and keeping those things from spawning. We blame global warming and everything else for those things collapsing, but uncontrolled fishing by people who are supposed to be just pulling out enough to eat, yet somehow are selling it on every roadside stand, are causing the problems there. We saw that similarly too, again, with the Stoney Reserve in Alberta. I remember in the 90s, they did a bunch of logging. You can still see it if you drive Highway 1 if you live out in Alberta and west of Calgary. And you see all that logging by the Kananaskis Turn. It's being reclaimed. The trees are growing back. Well, they logged all that out back in the 90s. No buffer zones, no riparian buffers, everything else. They made an ecological disaster. And what they ended up basically doing was suing the government for not stopping them, because it was on native land. But they did it, made such a mess that they sued us for not stopping them. And then we had to pay to reclaim the mess that they'd made. Now, I want to see these reserves develop local resources and get their own economy going. It's great. It's good for all of us. But they got to follow the same rules and regulations as the rest of us. I admit we got way too many rules and regulations, but some of them do have a reason. They do serve a purpose. And again, you've got to have the same ones for everybody if you're going to have them at all. And so things have gotten really tense, though. So some of the Nova Scotia fishers, out of desperation, actually burned down, it's called a lobster pound. It's the area where you're going to sell your lobster to after you've caught them, and that's where they'll get frozen or processed and shipped to wherever there might be a buyer. Because that's the thing, too. So this was terribly dangerous. A person got burned with life-threatening injuries. Somebody could have died. This is not the way we want to see this dispute coming to an end. But these people are at the end of the rope. They're losing their living. The government, of course, doesn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. They're terrified of native issues, so they're just kind of hoping that somehow it'll solve itself, and it won't. And an example, this is kind of what brought it to light recently. So a large lobster pound that was out there was run by this guy, as you can see here, and he was found guilty of illegally selling lobster, and he was shipping it to China, frozen. He was buying it, thousands of pounds of it. This stinger operation actually tagged lobster, put them back in the ocean, and then they could see who caught them and where they were sold. They were all caught by indigenous lobster fishermen and sold to this guy. Because they got to sell it somewhere. They can't just, it's not household consumption and it's not small sales. So pounds like this fella who were legally shipping it along are sending it out. So now that the local natives lost one of their bigger pipelines to be able to send out this lobster. It's just caused them to ramp things up further, and we've really got an explosive situation going on out there. And it's something I find ironic from the left-wingers and some of the natives, those they're screaming, we got to get the RCMP out here, they got to protect us, they got to do this, they got to do that. It wasn't that long ago, guys, and listening to your allies there, Black Lives Matter, who say we want to abolish the police, we don't want any police. Well, maybe these lobster fishers getting out, burning down pounds, and thing, you guys, is the community-based policing you were talking about. I mean, it's grassroots, it's bottom-up, isn't it? They're locals. You guys can settle it on your own? No? You want police? I can't tell. I don't know week by week what you assholes want. And, you know, what do we got? Get out of Mohawk's land. We're going to block the roads because RCMP have no jurisdiction with us. So apparently the RCMP don't have jurisdiction with the natives here. Or Wet'suwet'en, oh, they're invading their territory. Well, maybe the RCMP should just stay out of this. You know, you guys can all kind of sort this out on your own. Might not be a pretty way to go about it. We better figure out a balance here, guys, and let this just be something for people to think of or to respond to other people when they talk about something as fucking stupid as abolishing police, because it's not reasonable. We can reform police, but we can't get rid of them. Plus, we can't have a world where police only have authority on this race's property, but not that race's property. We're going to have a little civil war out there pretty soon if the police are not allowed to intervene somehow and get some order in there. And again, though, this is going to keep going on as long as we have race-based policy. Now, what are we doing in light of all this, though? Oh, look at that. Queens is dropping Sir John A. Macdonald's name from their law school building. Because again, we feel if we pander enough, if we erase history enough, these racial tensions are going to end. No, they aren't, you idiots. As long as we got racial policies, like the Indian Act, there's going to be racial tensions. Because you're having one class of people and another class of people. And it's based on bloodline, race, nothing else. It's unbelievable that the politically correct stance is to support what is literally institutionalized racism, and that's the Indian Act. We've got to stop it. But instead, no, we're running around trying to erase our country's founder's name from places. Here he is, Sir John A. The only, one purpose I see he stands, I prefer seeing his old face on our currency, because we'd see that moron Trudeau on there or something like that if we didn't have Sir John A. on there. This guy, yeah, he was a product of his times. He believed in the residential schools. They thought they were doing the right thing. Hey, things change. It was 150 years ago. Don't be stupid. It doesn't make it disappear. We're not still doing it. He was a historic figure. He did do some great things. He did some bad things. He was a drunkard. There were corruption scandals. But he was an integral part of the national history, and is bloody stupid with these efforts to try and erase him from our history. Now, speaking of cowards on the federal front, we've got the NDP. Trudeau and Singh, they're both kind of our co-prime ministers now. You can see how they bonded, actually. They have a lot in common in some ways. Either way, now that NDP tail is wagging the Liberal dog, it goes back and forth and it's reciprocal. So the Conservatives have been pushing really hard in the Weave scandal, because it looks like there's a lot more evidence that there was some more money being funneled and pipelined and essentially laundered into Trudeau's family, to his mommy and his brother, to give them extra things to do and make some bucks, because the trust fund wasn't just quite enough. And a lot of the documents that came in were redacted. So the Liberals had been filibustering the committee and stopping it from happening, from these documents getting out of Wayne Easter just shut down a committee out of the blue at a Zoom meeting. While Pierre Poilievre was getting too close to the truth. It's absurd. But the NDP said, we'll back down and we won't ask for those documents about your mommy and your brother anymore, because the NDP and the Liberals are in something of a partnership in screwing Canada right now, and they're doing a fantastic job of it. One of the deals cut, of course, is expanding our perpetual welfare program of CERB and such. We're just renaming it and changing it, but it's going to go on into next spring. And ignoring the fact that it's basically making us go broke. And now we're starting to see some of the consequences of having money handed out to people, just no questions asked, and given out to them to dispose of how they will. It's developed over this last 5 months a beautiful and blossoming drug market. We're seeing with overdoses have surpassed COVID deaths pretty much everywhere in Canada. I mean, the overdoses are exploding because, unfortunately, vulnerable people don't put CERB money into their RRSPs. They get drugs, and they take them, and they die. Now, the gangsters are using CERB to buy guns and protect their turf, because there's big business now going on. So these different gangs, of course, are wanting to get into it. So and the whole funding is actually out of the CERB. So isn't that comforting? Those few of us who are working for a living still and paying taxes, this is where it's going, is to fund these. Now the Liberals and the NDP like universal basic income ideas. That basically means CERB forever, no questions asked, money being given out. So we can see the gang aspect of what's going to go. But it's not just the street level gangs. It's not just the addicts. There's also lazy sons of bitches like this guy. He wrote this piece in the Globe and Mail a year ago. He said he doesn't want to do his PhD anymore. He's a career student. He's been languishing through our system for some time. Probably has a big debt, just wants to cruise around, party. He wants a UBI, and he writes and expands on that in his story, though. He's a poet. Yes, he's a poet. Nobody wants to buy his fucking poetry. So, in order to be a poet and make a living, he feels the world owes him a living through universal basic income. The only thing I can give this guy credit for, he's honest about it. He says, I want to sit on my ass and write poetry, and I want the world to pay me to do it. I'll give him that. But either way, quit denying reality. There are lazy bums out there. There are junkies out there. There are a great number of people out there who are not going to do better if we keep handing them money with no strings attached. We have people who need help, and we got to work on things. But let's not pretend that it's just as simple as writing checks, because actually the checks can cause more damage than what they're trying to solve. Much like our lockdowns aren't solving the pandemic. Now, getting to those who might want to work, let's get a little more provincial. The UCP had their policy convention on the weekend, and one of the things that's got the unions all stirred up, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to stir up unions, they're pretty vulnerable feeling people for some reason, is right to work legislation. This is the thing I always get a kick out of with union people. The thing they hate the most is giving their own members a choice. Why? If you guys are so damn good, why would you ever fear your members having the choice of whether or not they want to be with you? If you're so damn good, nobody's going to leave. They'll stick with you guys. Come on. And why do unions always hate secret ballots? There's only one reason anybody would ever hate a secret ballot. And unions are always fighting secret ballots on certification. Because they want to intimidate people, because they're friggin' thugs. That's why. There's only one kind of person who wants to see how everyone else is voting. It's the person who wants to intimidate those people to vote the way they want. Unions should have nothing to fear with right-to-work legislation. Now, the disappointing part is this was a policy convention. Now, these are party policy resolutions. I wish I could say they were things that were moving ahead, but I'll tell you what, Kenny's going to have enough fighting with the unions coming up in the next little while. I doubt he's going to move on right-to-work legislation. At best, policy resolutions at party conventions are broad suggestions to the caucus. And it's kind of good and bad. I mean, you can't have party members pick every policy if you've got a fluid and changing world where they, caucus and members have to respond to individual issues as they erupt. As well, a policy might not cover a rural MLA, might have not the same needs as an urban one. And with free voting, it should be something of more of a mismatch. Either way, I don't think we're going to see Kenny putting right-to-work legislation on the table legislatively anytime soon. I'd love it if he did, but I think he's going to move on with other things. They did also have a resolution talking about possibly having two-tier healthcare. Well, guess what, assholes? We've already got it. It's been happening for a long time. You don't see anybody on the flames there, if they get an injury, waiting for 18 months to get an MRI. They get it quickly. And people of heavy means will go, at least when it's not locked down, across the border, and they'll get treatment as well. So this is nothing new. Don't light your hair on fire. It's not a big deal. I'm hoping to see some health reforms. I want to see quadruple tiers going on, but for the time being, there's not a big pile of problems. Now, let's talk about our shitty press. Yes, here we go. Big headline. Ottawa surpasses 6,000 COVID-19 cases. Oh my God, and 2 deaths. Now, that's 6,000 total. That's 6,000 since COVID began. Actively, they just have 700 some. So why are we even talking about the 6,000? I tweeted that earlier. It's like reporting on the bubonic plague to talk about there's 16 million people with the bubonic plague. Well, yeah, that was all a few hundred years ago, but they had it. Okay, but how many have it today? Because that's all that really friggin' matters. How many have it today? Today in Ottawa, it's almost, a little more than 10% of what they're reporting. And it's just cases, not deaths. Look at that. 2 deaths in a large populated area. It turned out they were both people in their 80s. Tragic for those people in their 80s. But again, this plague is nothing like the media likes to make it out to be. Look at that crap. Why would you make a headline like that? Why? Why don't you say 700 and some COVID cases then, even if you're reporting on cases which really aren't that important? You know, of course, they keep forgetting to mention that we're testing more than ever as well. Thus, we get more cases. And they sure don't like talking about the fact that people aren't dying, because that doesn't sell papers, I guess. I'm really looking forward to the mainstream media truly falling apart, and they're coming close. So let's go over and talk about, though, those evil bastards, that nasty nation, those ones that are pissing off the world. Yes, those dirty, nasty Swedes, because they keep proving the fearmongers wrong. They still aren't locking down. They never did lock down. They never had mask legislation. They didn't shut down their schools. They didn't shut down their restaurants and bars. And guess what? They didn't friggin' die. Oh yeah, my pictures are sexist. Too many women. Well, let's be fair then. Here's a couple of Swedish men. I'm sure a few of my viewers will appreciate that view as well. One thing to be said for these Swedes, they are healthy looking, or at least the ones I pick in pictures, and that's fine. But they are healthy in reality, because let's have a look. Look at that. It's not just me talking out of my ass, guys. They stopped dying over there. It stopped happening. I mean, at the early part of the pandemic, you can see, like many nations, they went and put infected people in with their vulnerable ones. They put people in nursing homes. I mean, the worst possible place to put COVID-infected people, and their death rate was terrible. As it was, though it was less than Quebec and less than many other places, it was still bad. Once they figured that out and isolated people, look at that curve, right down to the flat line. No deaths on the 15th of October, which is the last report. And as you can see by that line, there's been virtually no deaths for weeks. They have one every few days. Yet, they didn't do all those measures that we're busy castrating our economies for right now. Go figure. I'm going to check in on them in a week or two, and guess what? They still won't be friggin' dying. And we'll probably still be locking ourselves down because we're friggin' stupid. Now, speaking of stupid, though, I'll get on to the Choad of the week, because this one's a beauty. So this is, he writes for the New Yorker. He's also a person who writes for CNN. He wrote a book going after President Trump. Oh, he's a good old lefty. He's woke. He's on top of things. He's a chronic masturbator. He was whacking off during a Zoom meeting with a radio station. I mean, this is the best thing for late night shows and comedians or even ranters like me since the Anthony Weiner incident. I mean, you can't beat this. Really, dude? Really? You know, at first they reported this. It just said, he was suspended over a Zoom incident. That broke today. Finally, somebody leaked it out. No, he was actually whacking off during a Zoom meeting. Man, I just don't know where to begin. Hey, you want to whack off? Good for you. You know, that's your business. My hand, my soap, I'll wash my pecker as long and hard as I want to, whatever. It's my business. But don't do it when you're sharing yourself with a good number of people. They don't want to look at it. And, of course, the picture leaked from the Zoom meeting finally to have a look. And, you know, that grotesque picture of him, and I thank them for putting the little party hat or whatever that is over his parts. This guy didn't just pull it out and, you know, have his way with himself, you know, quick little disobedience of the Pope. No, he went full Monty for it. Stark naked. The response is, let's see, an empty chair. Somebody got up and got the hell out of there. The fella up in the middle there just is, again, wondering what the hell is going on. A couple are laughing their heads off. One guy's standing against the wall in terror. Yeah, nobody is quite paid enough to endure such a thing. Either way, an embarrassing incident for this man. What the hell were you thinking? I mean, aside from the not thinking that the camera might be on while you're doing it, was the meeting really that boring? You couldn't make it. You couldn't get through 20 minutes, an hour, whatever the hell that meeting was going to take, and then turn off your camera, go off, rub one out. No, you just had to do it right friggin' now. Man, I don't know. I didn't want to waste that blue pill or something. Either way, that's all I've got to rant about this week. Thanks for joining me, letting me symbolically cry on your shoulder. Wednesday, I'll be on the panel. I'll be much more controlled. We'll be talking about the news of the week with probably Dave Naylor and Derek Fildebrand. Subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Subscribe to the Western Standard online if you haven't already. Let's keep us going. And we'll keep reporting good news and ranting about the bad and the stupid news. Good night.